Traditionally, the opening ceremony of the Victory Parade begins as the clock on the Kremlin's Spassky Tower strikes 10.
Парад под государственный флаг Российской Федерации.
We hear the command to carry out the state flag of the Russian Federation and the banner of victory.
Для встречи слева. На караул.
See the state flag of the Russian Federation and the banner of victory being brought out to Red Square. In the group of standard bearers are servicemen of the Guards of Honor Battalion, the 154th Commandant's Regiment of Moscow's Commandant's Office. They are granted the right to open the Victory Parade on the country's main square.
Военнослужащие батальона почетного караула 154-го отдельного комендантского полка военной комендатуры города Москвы. Именно им предоставлено право открыть парад Победы на главной площади страны. Государственный флаг Российской Федерации несет младший сержант Андрей Передков.
The state flag of the Russian Federation is being carried by Junior Sergei Andrei Peredkov. Also in the standard bearers group are privates Nikolai Efimenko and Andrei Mokretsov. Their grandfathers and great-grandfathers had participated in World War II. They had been awarded state decorations for the heroic deeds. Commanding the group of the state flag is Senior Sergeant Maxim Malakhov, commander of the Guards of Honor Company. The banner victory is in the hands of Junior Sergeant Gleb Yefimov, Deputy Section Commander of the Guards of Honor Company. Gleb earned this responsible right by his earnest service in the Army from the very first days. Also in the Victory Banner group are twins Dmitry and Viktor Gore. Commanding the group is Lieutenant Konstantin Kamelin. 65 years ago, during the battle for the Berlin city center, soldiers of the 150 Rifle Idritsy Division Sergeant Mikhail Yegorov and Junior Sergeant Meliton Kataria hoisted the red flag over the defeated Reichstag. This flag became immortalized in the history as the banner of victory.
Парад! Смирно! Для встречи слева! На караул!
65-й парад Победы принимает министр обороны Российской Федерации Анатолий Сердюков.
Inspecting the parade is Defense Minister of the Russian Federation, Anatoly Serdyukov. We see his limousine now passing through the gates of the Kremlin Pavsky Tower. Commanding the parade is Commander of the Moscow Military District, Colonel General Valery Gerasimov. Their limousines meet at the very center of Red Square.
Товарищ министр обороны Российской Федерации.
The commander of the parade, Colonel General Valery Gerasimov, reports to the Russian Defense Minister Anatoly Serdyukov that the troops to observe the 65th anniversary of the Great Victory are ready for the march past.
Министр обороны России Анатолий Сердюков и генерал-полковник Валерий Герасимов начинают
Anatoly Serdyukov and Colonel General Valery Gerasimov start reviewing the troops.
И максимальной синхронностью. За рулем машины министра обороны подполковник Алексей Слепых, а за рулем машины командующего войсками Московского военного округа подполковник Иван Прямуха.
Здравствуйте, товарищи!
As he reviews the troops, the defense minister congratulates the servicemen on the 65th anniversary of the Great Victory.
Великой Отечественной войне.
Министр обороны объезжает парадный строй, он приветствует военнослужащих и поздравляет их с 65-й годовщиной Великой Победы.
Здравствуйте, товарищи! Поздравляю вас!
The defense minister of the Russian Federation congratulates the troops of the different branches of the armed forces of the Russian Federation.
Во время объезда министром обороны парадного строя сводный военный оркестр Московского гарнизона под управлением генерал-майора Валерия Халилова исполняет 7 встречных маршей, 3 из которых принадлежат перу замечательного дирижера и композитора генерал-майора Семена Чернецкого.
Здравствуйте, товарищи! Поздравляю вас с 65-й годовщиной Победы в Великой Отечественной войне. Здравствуйте, товарищи! Поздравляю вас с 65-й годовщиной победы в Великой Отечественной войне. Здравствуйте, товарищи! Поздравляю вас с 65-й годовщиной победы в Великой Отечественной войне.
Сегодня в параде на Красной площади принимают участие более 11,5 тысяч военнослужащих. По возрожденной традиции парад будет состоять из 3 частей. Пеших парадных
According to tradition, the parade consists of 3 parts: march past of ground forces, military hardware demonstration, and the aircraft flyover.
Здравствуйте, товарищи! Поздравляю вас с 65-й годовщиной победы в Великой Отечественной войне.
В парадном строю на Красной площади военнослужащие лучших учебных заведений и воинских частей вооруженных сил Российской Федерации, отличники учебы и боевой подготовки, передовые офицеры, военнослужащие армий Великобритании, Соединенных Штатов Америки, Франции и Польши, стран-участниц Содружества независимых государств. Многие из тех, кто стоит сейчас на Кремлевской брусчатке, имеют боевой опыт, награждены орденами и медалями.
We see the Defense Minister of the Russian Federation coming up to the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Federation, President Medvedev. He is reporting that the armed forces and the troops of the Moscow garrison are ready for the march past. Stand at ease.
Дорогие ветераны,
Dear veterans,
уважаемые граждане России,
dear citizens of Russia,
уважаемые зарубежные гости,
dear foreign guests,
товарищи солдаты и
comrade
матросы,
soldiers, sailors, and sergeants,
товарищи офицеры,
comrade officers,
генералы
generals,
и
and
адмиралы.
admirals.
Поздравляю вас
I
с
congratulate you
юбилеем
on the
Великой
Jubilee
Победы.
of the Great Victory.
65 лет назад
65 years ago,
нацизм.
Nazism was vanquished.
Остановлена машина
The
уничтожения
machine that was eliminating
целых
whole
народов.
nations was stopped.
Нашей стране
Peace
и всей
returned
Европе
our country and to
возвращен
Europe
мир.
as a whole.
Положен конец
An end was
идеологии,
put to the ideology
разрушавшей основы
that was destroying the foundations of civilization.
Советский Союз принял на себя
The Soviet Union bore the brunt of the fascist attack.
Они бросили на
They
Восточный
threw in
фронт,
3/4 of their troops to the Eastern Front.
хотели испепелить
They
нашу
wanted to
страну,
scorch our land.
но встретили
Instead,
сопротивление,
they met with resistance,
беспримерное по
unexampled
мужеству
in
и
courage
силе.
and strength.
Оборона Москвы и Ленинграда,
The defense of Moscow and Leningrad, the Battle of Stalingrad, the Kursk
это не
Bulge,
просто этап
these
истории.
are not just stages of that war.
Это кровь и слезы,
They are blood and tears, the pain of failure and triumph of victories, wounds and death of comrades in arms.
и один выбор.
And there was only one choice, either conquer the enemy
Стать
or
рабами.
become slaves.
Эта война сделала
This
нас
war
сильной
has
нацией.
made us a strong nation. Every day, every hour, every minute,
Люди принимали
people
решения.
made decisions,
На полях
both
сражений
in
в тылу
battlefields and in the rear.
и особую
And this
ответственность
particular
за судьбу
feeling of
страну.
personal responsibility for the fate of the country, our veterans have carried through their entire lives.
Наши ветераны
Our
дали нам
veterans
главное.
taught us the main lesson.
Они завоевали
They
нам свободу.
have achieved freedom for us.
Время имеет огромную власть.
Time has a huge power, but it is not as powerful as human memory, our memory.
Мы никогда не
We shall
забудем
never
солдат,
forget soldiers
сражавшихся
who
на
fought
фронтах,
on the fronts,
женщин,
women
заменивших
who
мужчин
replaced
на
men in
заводах,
factories,
детей, прошедших
children who
через
came through
немыслимые
trials
возраста испытаний.
inconceivable for their age.
Все они
All of them
герои
are
войны.
heroes of the war.
В 1945 году была
In
одержана не только
1945, not
военная,
only a
но и
military,
большая
but also a
нравственная
great
победа.
moral victory
Общая
was
победа.
achieved, a common
За
victory.
нее боролись
All peoples of
все
the
народы
former
бывшего
USSR
Союза СССР.
have struggled for it.
Ее приближали наши
Our
союзники.
allies were advancing
И
it.
сегодня в
And today,
торжественном параде
soldiers of
вместе
Russia,
пройдут солдаты России,
CIS countries, and anti-Hitler coalition states will march together triumphantly.
единый строй,
A single rank
свидетельство нашей
is an evidence of our
общей
common
готовности
readiness
защищать
to
мир.
defend peace,
Не допустить
not to
пересмотра
allow to
итогов
revise the
войны,
outcomes of war
не
and new
допустить новых
tragedies.
трагедий. Война лишила жизни
The war
десятки
has
миллионов
killed tens
людей,
of millions of people,
граждан многих
citizens of many
возрастов.
countries of various ages, nationalities, and confessions.
В России
In Russia,
практически в каждой
practically
семье
every family
есть тот, кто
has
погиб
its
или
members
пропал
who
в
died
бедности,
or
кто
went
умер от
missing,
голода
who
в
was
блокаде,
starving from hunger during the
кого
blockade of
сожгли
Belgrade,
в печах
Leningrad,
концлагерей.
who was burned down in concentration
С
camps.
этим невозможно
That
смириться.
cannot be tolerated.
Невозможно
That
забыть.
cannot be forgotten.
Вечная им память.
Eternal memory to them.
Уважаемые друзья,
Dear friends,
уроки Второй
the
мировой
lessons of
призывают
World War
нас к
II
солидарности.
called us to solidarity.
Мир
The
по-прежнему
world
в
remains
группах.
fragile,
И мы обязаны
and we
помнить,
should remember
войны не
that
начинаются
wars
в одночасье.
do not start in a flash.
Зло набирает силу,
Evil gains its
Если перед
strength
ним
if we shrink
отступают,
back
стараются
or try
его
to
не замечать.
ignore it.
Только вместе
Only together
мы сможем
can we
противостоять
counteract modern threats.
современным угрозам. Только на
Only
основе
based on
добрососедства
principles of
решать
good
проблемы
neighborliness
глобальной
can we
безопасности.
resolve issues of
Чтобы
global
идеалы
security
справедливости и добра
so that ideals of justice and the good can
во всем
triumph in the whole
мире.
world
А жизнь будущих
and life
поколений
of future
была
generations
свободной
can be
и
free
счастливой.
and happy.
Дорогие ветераны,
Dear veterans,
65 лет назад
65 years ago,
вы
you
завоевали
won
мир
peace
для нашей
for your
страны
motherland
и для всей планеты.
and for the whole planet,
И дали нам саму
and
возможность.
granted us an opportunity just to live.
Низкий вам
I pay homage to you.
с праздником вас!
I congratulate you on the
Днем
holiday,
Великой Победы!
on the day of great victory.
Слава победителям!
I glorify the winners.
Ура!
We now hear the national anthem of the Russian Federation.
Парад! Мирно! Торжественному маршу!
The parade's leader, commander of the Moscow Military District, Colonel General Valery Gerasimov, opens the victory parade and orders the troops to march across Red Square in battalion units. And now we see the linesmen who are going to be marking off the edge of Red Square. And the troops will move opposite them across Red Square.
Равнение направо. Шагом марш!
Открывает парад Победы командующий войсками Московского военного округа
is opened up
полковник Валерий Герасимов.
By the commander of the Moscow Military District, Colonel General Valery Gerasimov. And following the commander's vehicle, we see young drummers of the military band conductors university, and they set the pace and rhythm of the march past. And now, as the young drummers march across Red Square, we go back to our presenters, Sophie Kosher-Bernadze and Bill Dodd, who will also be talking to our political commentator Peter Lavelle and Sergei Savchenko in our studios.
Мимо трибун проходят знаменные группы с государственным флагом Российской Федерации, знаменем Победы и знаменем Вооруженных сил России. Следом проносят штандарты фронтов Великой Отечественной войны и знамена наиболее отличившихся в войне соединений.
Thank you very much indeed, George Watts. This is RT coming to you live from the heart of the Russian capital, bringing you coverage of today's victory parade taking place behind us here on Red Square. And, of course, we're bringing you live extensive coverage throughout the day of today's events.
And now that the military parade has started, let's cross to our political commentator Peter Lavelle for more on it, who is watching it, and also military analyst Sergei Savchenko.
Thank you for that, Sofiko and Bill. And again, I'm with Sergei Savchenko. I'm a former military officer. Let's jump right in here, Sergei. Look at these uniforms here. Are these from the period itself? Because it looks to me that we're going to see a variety of time periods with the uniforms of all of the military personnel that will be marching here.
Well, you're absolutely right. The soldiers you see marching now, they are wearing uniforms of the 1945 vintage, similar to those that were worn by the participants of the 1945 parade. But
you told me something as we were watching this in the very beginning. You said a lot of those uniforms in 1945 were American-made because of Lend-Lease.
Well, it's true, actually. They began to supply to us military uniforms stitched in the U.S. beginning from 1942, I believe. So, quite a lot of them.
So it wasn't just spam and trucks, it was uniforms as well. Let's remind our viewers here, about 200,000 veterans are watching this parade all across Russia today. There are 100 veterans from foreign countries participating, and there are about 300 veterans sitting in the audience there watching this here. So this is something that really brings quite a few countries together. I think it's very interesting that we saw Angela Merkel, the German chancellor. The very thought of the German chancellor could be sitting in Moscow on a Victory Day parade even 10 years ago was basically unthinkable. This is an amazing moment, and this is a European moment here. We see here some dignitaries from the CIS. We have to always remember when we say the CIS, it's the former Soviet Union. And there were countless numbers of CIS soldiers in that great struggle as well. And they're always honored on this day. It's just not a Russian day. It's the peoples of the Soviet Union, actually the victors of this war.
Well, that's absolutely true. And the fact that we also have Allied troops marching in this parade, it's another very important event because the Polish troops are actually taking part in this parade for the second time.
Again, this is extraordinary. We see reconciliation in the process here, right before our eyes. This is happening here. And this is very important. I'd like to remind our viewers, this is so very important to Russia because of the cost that the Soviet Union, the Russian people, and other peoples had to pay for victory over fascism 65 years ago. This is a very meaningful, very real event that happens every single year here, where in the West that the memory has been faded, other issues, and for other things that Sergei and I will talk about later. Just to give you a point here, you know, the 27 million lost during the Second World War from the Soviet Union. Put this into perspective, because the war lasted 1,418 days. Just do the math. That's 19,040 individuals who lost their lives every single day. This is why it is remembered so strongly in this country and in the CIS. The cost was tremendously high, and it will not be forgotten. As we heard President Medvedev say, it was a war to conquer or become slaves. It was a conflict of blood and tears, and he even said failures, you know. And this is again getting back to the entire history. Soviet history had a very certain rendition. Now it's opening up the archives, a lot more frank talk, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But you know, tell us what we see here, Sergei. Who are these guys here? Well, they're beautifully dressed. They're marching wonderfully.
Well, in fact, the way the parade is organized it's organized by regiments, by combined regiments. The regiments representing the Army, the ground forces, the Air Force, the Navy, and also the strategic missile forces, the space forces, and the troops that come from all sorts of other arms of the Russian army, including the airborne troops and naturally the emergency troops, MCS, the column, and the academies that train all those soldiers.
Can you tell our viewers, is it prestigious to be in the military today? Is it prestigious because we had the collapse, we had the end of the Soviet Union in 1991?
By the way, you can see the Polish troops marching now.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, here we have Polish troops here. Obviously, there's been animosity since '45 to the president, but with the sudden and tragic death of President-elect Kaczynski, we've seen a rapprochement, reconciliation that, again, would have thought unimaginable even a year ago. And it's a great honor to see the Poles here. They suffered tremendously during the Second World War. And it is just as fresh for them as it is for many people in this country and the CIS. So I think also we have the British troops here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's the British troops. And I think you can easily understand that they are British by their jackets. And also, this particular
Well, we can now cross over to our correspondent, Anisa Nawi, and she's in the heart of where all the action's happening at the moment, just a matter of meters away from the parade itself in Red Square.
Hi there, Bill. That's right. We have such an exclusive view here, practically in the middle of Red Square. And as we've been saying, this is the first time in history that the countries that made up the Allied forces are taking part in this parade. They're making their way through Red Square as we speak. First, we have the elite Welsh Guard of Buckingham Palace, of course, from Great Britain. Again, a symbol of how the Allies worked together some 65, 70 years ago during World War II. Also participating, members of the U.S. Armed Forces and, of course, the French Armed Forces. That a very important symbol for Russia and their wartime allies. Of course, you have the very well-known fighter squadron, the Normandy Neiman, and that is a great symbol of how the Soviet Union worked with its allies to defeat fascism during World War II. We have veterans watching all this, tears in their eyes. This is a day that is very important to all Russians, but especially, of course, to those who took part in the war and saw everything themselves. We can get first-hand accounts from them. And as an old Soviet song says, this is a day with tear-stained eyes, but with pride in your heart. So a lot of mixed feelings on Red Square as this parade takes place, and veterans are looking on 65 years after victory over Nazi Germany. Bill, Sophie, back to you.
Overlooking Red Square, and what we'll do now is cross back to our commentators Peter Lavelle and Sergei Savchenko for more on the parade as it takes place.
Thanks for that, Bill. It's again, you know, we were just talking about this reconciliation process. It's remarkable that it took 65 years for with soldiers that used to be in unison. They never really marched together, but now they are marching together in memory, which I think is just as good. You know, Sergei, can you remind our audience, why is it May 9th and not May 8th? Because this is what happens in Europe and the United States. Why are the days different?
I think it was, not a think, but it's for a fact, it was a decision passed by Joseph Stalin. And when he was making his declaration, announcing the end of the Second World War, or the Great Patriotic War for this matter, he actually said, and I almost quote him saying that the act of capitulation in Germany was signed on the 8th of May, and I pronounced the 9th of May the victory day. That's what he said.
But it was also because it was already the 9th in Moscow, and it was still the 8th in Germany, so we had a time difference there. So it was actually the 9th in Russia, in Moscow it is, but it still hadn't, the clocks hadn't changed for the hours by. So we end up having these two different times and 2 different days that it's celebrated here. Let's also take a look at some of the other issues that are involved here. Like I pointed out that Angela Merkel is here, which is a very important symbolic issue for Russia. And remarkably, 2 very, very bitter, hated enemies now are very, very strong partners in Europe. Angela Merkel is a Russian speaker. Prime Minister Putin is a German speaker. So there's a lot of commonalities there. We see a very strong relationship here, and I think it's really wonderful to see that, because we have to remind our viewers that it was reconciliation that brought Europe together. The European Union today, is the basis of it was reconciliation between France and Germany. Now we're seeing reconciliation between all of Europe and Russia, and it's good. It is through history, painful history, sure, but it has to be a mutual history that everyone can accept, and no one who lost their lives should be discriminated against.
Well, this is absolutely true, and I cannot agree more with such an approach to history.
Who are these young men here?
They certainly is Air Force, and I understand that this is the Zhukovsky Academy.
Okay, could you remind us who Mr. Zhukov was? I mean,
Not Zhukov, Zhukovsky.
Oh, Zhukovsky, okay.
Zhukovsky was the founder of Russian aviation, and it dates back to the early 20th century. And, you know, marching here are the people who studied there, the officers who studied there, and lots of them later on became cosmonauts and flew into space. And today this academy, that academy bears the name of both Zhukovsky and Yuri Gagarin. So that's what I can tell about it.
It was very much like the American tradition, going from the Air Force into NASA.
Oh, yeah.
Look, it's just absolutely beautiful weather here.
That's the Navy for you.
Everybody was saying it was going to rain on them. It looks like it's beautiful outside. You know, you're a Russian, and so what are Russians when they're watching this here? Can you explain the psyche, what's going through their mind? Are they thinking about their grandfather and their great-grandfather? And what does it mean to be Russian? Because this is a modern experience that really binds people together.
Well, it's not an easy question to answer, of course, because, you know, you cannot find an average Russian or a typical Russian, and Russians have a lot of views and a lot of attitudes towards even this day. However, predominantly, I feel and I know that Russians are filled with pride. And if you look at these formations as they're marching, you can say that these formations are actually wonderfully organized, and you cannot imagine how much time and effort it requires to march like this, in unison, and also you see all the files are absolutely straight. And I know that when I was a cadet myself, we took part in a few parades, and to walk in a straight file abreast, it's a very difficult thing, and we had to touch the elbows of each other so that we knew that it was like that, but it took a lot of practice for us to achieve such results.
You said something very interesting, and I think is worth reflecting upon, is that a lot has happened in this country since 1991. It was the economic and social collapse, political collapse of Russia in the 1990s. It's only been in the last 10 years that, in my opinion anyway, that Russia's gotten back on its feet. And there's still a lot of differences of opinion about what the country's been through recently and where it's going. But my sense after living here for over a decade is that one word that you used, pride, about the achievements, the amazing cost, 27 million people. That is really extraordinary. When you look at the siege of Leningrad, the almost 800-day siege where 800,000 people perished. I mean, that is such a tremendous cost. To give it in perspective for our Western viewers, we look at the most horrific battle of the war, Stalingrad. The Germans and the Soviets lost more troops separately than the United States lost in the entire war. That gives you the magnitude of the level of war that was here. Estimates 80% of the entire war effort was on the Eastern Front. And unfortunately, in my humble opinion, I don't want to pour cold water on this, it isn't all about saving Private Ryan. These are the results, the progeny of the heroes of 1941 to 1945.
Yes, I fully agree with what you have just said and your assessment of how Russians feel about it. By and large, if you talk to any Russian, you would hardly find a family that had not lost someone in that war. And it applies to my family as well and to the families of all those people that I know. And I would also venture to say something else about the damage that this war caused. This is the fact that the first generations of the Soviet young people who were brought up in a different different traditions, and they actually were very patriotic, and I would not use the word indoctrinated, but they were living with the spirit that they were creating their bright future, whatever. All these people had to die in the war, in the first ranks, because they volunteered to go to the front. And if you look at the statistics, you'd find that the cream of the cream, of that first generation of Russian people born, beginning from, say, 1914 and all the way onwards to 1920, when they could be drafted, they had to perish in the war, and this is one of the biggest losses that we had suffered. We would have had a different country if these people were alive.
Exactly, the demographics of this country has changed forever. Still to this day, there are far more females than there are males, and that is a result of the tremendous cost of the war in defeating fascism in 1945, victory in 1945. We still have, that legacy is still here. And of course here, living in Moscow, and I want to always point out to our viewers that Moscow is kind of like New York. New York isn't like the rest of America, so Moscow isn't always like the rest of Russia. But you cannot, going down any major street, you cannot miss some reference to the Second World War. The Great Patriotic War, as it's called here. And again, as Sergei was pointing out, is that there's not one family that didn't suffer a loss, or many losses in some cases, and the cream of the crop of Soviet society was decimated during this war.
Absolutely. And that's very sad to hear that. If you look at the picture, you can actually, the distant tier forces are marching. You can know that by the color of the berets, which is quite obvious. And we have missed some of the previous participants in this parade, but as I told you, before. They are organized.
We just saw the Czech President Klaus that was sitting right there. Keep going, Sergei. Go ahead.
Correct. They are organized into combined regiments, and each regiment contains representatives of whatever arms are included in that regiment. So it's like that.
You know, we were talking about the Allied troops that are marching for the first time, unprecedented in a Victory Day parade. But not everyone was pleased about that. There were people saying that they didn't like the idea that NATO troops, they put it that way, not former allies, but NATO troops would march the streets of Moscow. I think I'm pleased by it. I see it as the reconciliation. On this day, we have to look to the past, and maybe because of this form of reconciliation, we can look to the future.
Well, historically, let's put it this way, it's not the first time that the Allied forces march together in a Victory Day parade. I want to remind you of the fact that on the 7th of September, 1945, in Berlin, there was a parade when all the Allied forces were participating. So this is the first time, not the first time that they're doing it today. Besides, I tried to say it before, the Polish troops were actually taking part in the parade in 1945. And at that time, actually, the commander of the parade...
Well, we can certainly say it's the first time since 1991.
Okay.
We're safe on that one.
That would make sense. That makes sense, absolutely. Absolutely correct.
All right, I'd like to kind of remind our viewers here, it's been estimated that about 200,000 veterans are watching the parade right now at home and in different cities around the country. About 100 foreign veterans have come to experience this event, and there are at least 300 veterans with the best seats in the house there watching the parade itself.
Well, I'm sure that throughout the world, you can find Russian people throughout the world now. They're quite scattered. And I would not be surprised if lots of them are tuned to this particular channel and are watching us now.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised by that, yes, because we're giving wall-to-wall coverage here. Also, who else is in attendance? There's 30 foreign leaders that are here, mostly from Europe. We, as I pointed out earlier, Angela Merkel is here, which I think is very significant, extremely important. Because of the two foes are now very close, I would even say allies in many ways. The two countries are very, very close, very good trading partners. And Angela Merkel is a politician that seems to understand Russia, the new Russia, very well. Sergei, when I think of this parade when it was performed the first time on June 24th in 1945, I think of those standards being thrown at the foot of Stalin. As a Russian, what does that kind of invoke in your mind?
Well, I think that the general idea was to humiliate the German enemy.
Well, tell me about the gloves. You're not telling me the whole story. Give me the whole story. Go ahead.
Well, that was part of that humiliation in the sense that all the soldiers that were supposed to carry those standards and throw them to the foot of the mausoleum, to the Lenin's tomb, they were obliged to wear gloves. And the procedure following that was that all those gloves were collected and burned, so that nothing would...
The symbolism of...
Absolutely.
Amazing here. We see here veterans right here, an honored group of people. I think we see some of the hardware coming up here. Sergei, you're going to have to get in charge of this, okay? But again, we see the veterans here. Why don't we just let this breathe just for a couple minutes?
This is the combined marching band.
All right. Why don't we give it a hear for just about a minute or so? Let's just listen.